Karl Marx, German Ideology, 1845. Part 1, Feuerbach, Opposition of the Materialist and Idealist Outlook. A. Idealism and Materialism. History, Fundamental Conditions. Part 6. Since we are dealing with the Germans, who are devoid of premises, we must begin by stating the first premise of all human existence and, therefore, of all history. The premise, namely, that man must be in a position to live in order to be able to make history. But life involves, before everything else, eating and drinking, a habitation, clothing, and many other things. The first historical act is thus the production of the means to satisfy these needs, the production of material life itself. And indeed, this is an historical act, a fundamental condition of all history, which today, as thousands of years ago, must daily and hourly be fulfilled merely in order to sustain human life. Even when the sensuous world is reduced to a minimum, to a stick as with St. Bruno Bauer, it presupposes the action of producing the stick. Therefore, in any interpretation of history, one has first of all to observe this fundamental fact in all its significance and all its implications to accord its due importance. It is well known that the Germans have never done this, and they have never, therefore, had an earthly basis for history and consequently never an historian. The French and the English, even if they have conceived the relation of this fact with so-called history only in an extremely one-sided fashion, particularly as long as they remain in the toils of political ideology, have nevertheless made the first attempts to give the writing of history a materialistic basis by being the first to write histories of civil society, of commerce, and industry. The second point is that the satisfaction of the first need, the action of satisfying, and the instrument of satisfaction which has been acquired, leads to new needs, and this production of new needs is the first historical act. Here we recognize immediately the spiritual ancestry of the great historical wisdom of the Germans who, when they run out of positive material and when they can serve up neither theological nor political nor literary rubbish, assert that this is not history at all, but the prehistoric era. They do not, however, enlighten us to how we proceed from this nonsensical prehistory to history proper, although, on the other hand, in their historical speculation they seize upon this prehistory with a special eagerness, because they imagine themselves safe there from interference on the part of crude facts, and, at the same time, because there they can give full rein to their speculative impulse and set up and knock down hypotheses by the thousand. The third circumstance, which, from the very outset, enters into historical development is that men, who daily remake their own life, begin to make other men, to propagate their kind, the relation between man and woman, parents and children, the family. The family, which to begin with is the only social relationship, because later, when increased needs create new social relations and the increased population new needs, a subordinate one, except in Germany, and must then be treated and analyzed according to the existing empirical data, not according to the concept of the family, as is the custom in Germany. These three aspects of social activity are not, of course, to be taken as three different stages, but just as three aspects, or to make it clear to the Germans, three moments which have existed simultaneously since the dawn of history in the first men, and which still assert themselves in history today. The production of life, both of one's own in labor and in fresh life and procreation, now appears as a double relationship, on the one hand as a natural, on the other as a social relationship. By social, we understand the cooperation of several individuals, no matter under what conditions, in what manner, and to what end. It follows from this that a certain mode of production, or industrial stage, is always combined with a certain mode of cooperation, or social stage, and this mode of cooperation is itself a productive force. Further, that the multitude of productive forces accessible to men determines the nature of society, hence, that the history of humanity must always be studied and treated in relation to the history of industry and exchange. But it is also clear how in Germany it is impossible to write this sort of history, because the Germans lack not only the necessary power of comprehension and the material, but also the evidence of their senses. For across the Rhine, you cannot have any experience of these things since history has stopped happening. Thus, it is quite obvious from the start that there exists a materialistic connection of men with one another, which is determined by their needs and their mode of production, and which is as old as men themselves. This connection is ever taking on new forms, and thus presents a history independently of the existence of any political or religious nonsense, which in addition may hold men together. Only now, after having considered for moments 4 aspects of the primary historical relationships, do we find that man also possesses consciousness, but even so, not inherent, not pure consciousness. From the start, the spirit is afflicted with the curse of being burdened with matter, which here makes its appearance in the form of agitated layers of air, sounds, in short, of language. Language is as old as consciousness. Language is practical consciousness that exists also for other men, and for that reason alone it really exists for me personally as well. Language, like consciousness, only arises from the need, the necessity of intercourse with other men. Where there exists a relationship, it exists for me. The animal does not enter into relations with anything. It does not enter into any relation at all. For the animal, its relation to others does not exist as a relation. Consciousness is, therefore, from the very beginning a social product, and remains so as long as men exist at all. Consciousness is at first, of course, merely consciousness concerning the immediate sensuous environment and consciousness of the limited connection with other persons and things outside the individual who is growing self-conscious. At the same time, it is consciousness of nature, which first appears to men as completely alien, all-powerful, and unassailable force with which men's relations are purely animal and by which they are overawed like beasts. It is thus a purely animal consciousness of nature, natural religion, just because nature is as yet hardly modified historically. We see here immediately this natural religion of this particular relation of men to nature is determined by the form of society and vice versa. Here, as everywhere, the identity of nature and man appears in such a way that the restricted relation of men to nature determines the restricted relation to one another, and the restricted relation to one another determines man's restricted relation to nature. On the other hand, man's consciousness of the necessity of associating with the individuals around him is the beginning of the consciousness that he is living in society at all. This beginning is as animal as social life itself at this stage. It is mere herd consciousness, and at this point man is only distinguished from sheep by the fact that with him consciousness takes the place of instinct, or that his instinct is a conscious one. The sheep-like or tribal consciousness receives its further development and extension through increased productivity, the increase of needs, and, what is fundamental to both of these, the increase of population. With these, there develops the division of labor, which was originally nothing but the division of labor in the sexual act. Then that division of labor which develops spontaneously or naturally by virtue of natural predisposition, e.g. physical strength, needs, accidents, etc., etc. Divisions of labor only becomes truly such from the moment when a division of material and mental labor appears. The first form of ideologists, priests, is concurrent. From this moment onwards, consciousness can really flatter itself that it is something other than consciousness of existing practice. that it really represents something without representing something real. From now on, consciousness is in a position to emancipate itself from the world and to proceed to the formation of pure theory, theology, philosophy, ethics, etc. But even if this theory, theology, philosophy, ethics, etc. comes into contradiction with the existing relations, this can only occur because existing social relations have come into contradiction with existing forces of production. This, moreover, can also occur in a particular national sphere of relations through the appearance of the contradiction, not within the national orbit, but between this national consciousness and the practice of other nations, i.e., between the national and the general consciousness of a nation, as we see it now in Germany. Moreover, it is quite immaterial what consciousness starts to do on its own. Out of all such muck, we get only the one inference that these three moments, the forces of production, the state of society, and consciousness, can and must come into contradiction with one another, because the division of labor implies the possibility, nay, the fact, that intellectual and material activity, enjoyment and labor, production and consumption, devolve on different individuals, and that the only possibility of their not coming into contradiction lies in the negation in its turn of the division of labor. It is self-evident, moreover, that specters, bonds, the higher being, concept, scruple, are merely the idealistic, spiritual expression, the conception apparently of the isolated individual, the image of very empirical fetters and limitations, within which the mode of production of life and the form of intercourse coupled with it move.